Welcome back to another episode of Al Shakal Al Sadlana, Our Middle East. And what a seismic shift across the Middle East, better known as an earthquake between Venezuela, the Iranian regime, Somaliland, and Israel and America on the way up. We're really delighted to have a very special guest and a friend, Rawaan Osman, who is a daughter of the Middle East, a daughter of Lebanon, a daughter of Syria, and more recently, a daughter of Israel. So we have, Rawaan, what a pleasure to have you and to get your insights at this critical moment in modern Middle Eastern history.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Indeed, a lot is happening. And to call it an earthquake is an understatement.
What could we call it that's beyond an earthquake? It might be a nuclear detonation of a region that, we don't know where all the pieces are going to fall out. But the whole region is watching itself transform really because of the very active, confident, and rather aggressive statements and actions of the leader of the free world, President Trump.
Instead of an earthquake, I would call it a transformation. And I think it's part of the domino effect that started on October 7th. What was meant as a final war against Israel changed the direction, and the so-called axis of resistance might be surprised with a final war, but against dictatorships. And we must admit that what happened in Venezuela was a nice plot twist. Similar to that we've seen in Lebanon, for example, with the pager operation or the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. It's about time that those tyrants who seemed invincible part ways, at least with their people. I think whether we're talking about the Venezuelans or the Lebanese, in Lebanon where I have family, or in Syria where I have friends and family, or in Iran, the Iranian people is beautiful and brave, and all those peoples deserve better.
You're a daughter of a mom from Lebanon and a daughter of a dad from Syria. How did the Lebanon for so many years, certainly since the early 1980s when Hezbollah and the Iranian regime entrenched themselves deeply, and it was really a puppet state of the Iranian regime in many ways, even though you have Druze, you have Christians, you have 7 or 8 different major ethnic groups in Lebanon. But in fact, Lebanon saw after October 7th, and it probably took a year. September 2024 was the major tectonic shift when Israel assassinated Iran's local leader Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Secretary General of Hezbollah, and then ultimately took out Hamas's leadership, Sinwar and others, and also then hit Iran. From a Lebanese point of view and from a Syrian point of view, they're looking at Israel and what's going on in their minds?
So right after October 7th, Israel's reputation was shaken, especially in the Arab world. And that was coupled with Hamas's propaganda, or with the propaganda spread by the axis of resistance, by the proxies of the Islamic Republic. They convinced many in the Arab world that the IDF is not invincible after all. Look at what we've done to them. We humiliated them. Hamas, a terror organization, not an army, executed a perfect attack, and that is not to praise what happened on October 7th. So a lot of people had their doubts, and they thought maybe Israel's end is near. But by the time Israel understood what happened, when they regained control, when the Mossad reminded the world that they are active, they were not sleeping, they restored Israel's reputation, especially in Lebanon, especially when they killed the most charismatic actor in the so-called axis of resistance, The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah changed the entire game. And believe it or not, in many Arab countries, people were dancing with Bibi Netanyahu's pictures celebrating Abu Ya'ir, father of Ya'ir. So that restored Israel's place in the Middle East, and people understood why Israel, especially the Israeli army, gained such a reputation around the world. So it gave people hope, because if Israel was defeated, as people felt after October 7th, if Israel was indeed weakened, that says that the axis of resistance and its proxies, those actors of evil in the region, are stronger than the axis formed by the West between Israel and the other allies, some of the countries in the Gulf. And when Israel changed the game, people understood that there is hope, that they don't have to live for eternity under the mercy of tyrants. And remember that right after Israel signed the ceasefire in Lebanon, the jihadist troops mobilized and moved from Idlib, and within 11 days, they took Damascus. They overthrew al-Assad regime. Am I happy about what's happening in Syria? Am I celebrating al-Julani? Not at all.
Why not? Why aren't you celebrating Julani? And you said
First,
Julani, not al-Shara, by the way.
because he is al-Julani and he is al-Shara. I choose to call him al-Julani. We thought that al-Shara managed to kill al-Julani, that persona, and to embrace a different role. Unfortunately, that was a massive, massive disappointment. I was happy when the jihadists finally got rid of Assad or pushed him out, because we needed the corridor between Iran and Hezbollah shut once and for all. Al-Julani came and I thought, okay, he got a deal. Obviously, otherwise Israel would have stopped those jihadists from advancing. And I was hoping that he will keep his part of the deal. It was so obvious that he made a deal with the West, that he was groomed for leadership, and that everything was meticulously planned. Was he going to stick to his part? I don't see him doing that. Whether he lost control over gangsters, over jihadists who refuse to obey him, or he's turning the blind eye, what was done and still is happening to non-Muslims in Syria is not acceptable.
You mean when we're talking about al-Suwaida, we're talking about what?
Not only, not exclusively. First, the jihadists and many of the rebels abused the Kurds. And then they abused Alawites, and the world turned the blind eye because we didn't really know who was involved with the Assad regime, who was not. So people thought, it's understandable, this vengeance after more than 5 decades of Assad rule in Syria. And then they targeted the Syrians, the Christians in Syria. So at a university, they humiliated young men who were sitting with their female colleagues. And we've seen the video footage of them beaten up, bleeding, just for sitting at the university campus with their female friends. And what happened in Suwaida was crossing every red line. That was, I dare say, not to relativize, but I dare say, even worse than what happened on October 7th. It became a trend to kill, murder, rape, and film yourself, not afraid of consequences. They were showing their faces just like Hamas did. But of course, when Hamas gets away with what they've done on October 7th, this will become a trend, unfortunately.
Yes, it set a standard for, prideful genocide and self-declaration of genocide. It is funny, isn't it, that whenever Israel undertakes a counterterror operation, right away it's all everything's genocide, even though anybody who took a 5th grade course on genocide would understand that there's no connection between Israel targeting terrorists publicly and on the ground. I mean, in terms of their rhetoric and in their action, and what people are saying. By the way, in a related point, in President Trump's very aggressive and well executed capture of the mafia head and president of Nicaragua, president not of Nicaragua, of Venezuela. Nicaragua also is online, but of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. You see the discourse calling it a Zionist conspiracy.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter how much the United States takes credit for it.
It's unbelievable that even Al Jazeera relentlessly accuses America of kidnapping President Maduro. All those kafiyeh-wearing hysterical activists are so outraged because of the kidnapping of President Maduro. The same agents, the same people who refuse until today to call the Israeli who were kidnapped on October 7th.
And the children, the Bibas children, for example.
Yeah. So the Bibas children, let's remind the world and your audience that on their coffins, Hamas wrote in Arabic and in Hebrew, Tarikh al-I'tiqal, the date of arrest, October 7th. And I ask especially angry university students who challenge my position during my talks, I ask them, how do you arrest a 4-year-old boy? How do you arrest a baby? Like, how do you explain this? How do you accept it? So those were arrested and Maduro was kidnapped.
Yeah.
Make it make sense.
So the only way we can make it sense is called Soviet language conditioning. It's right out of the Soviet playbook of active measures, and the PLO learned from the Soviets in the 1970s and 80s, and the Hamas actually learned from the PLO. So the Hamas's rageful race for legitimacy and their disinformation campaigns, their media deception campaigns come very much from the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and the Fatah.
Didn't the Russians help Yasser Arafat invent this Palestinian identity?
They did. In fact, it was known by former Russian agents that the Russians were behind the whole UN push for UN
Resolution
3379, Zionism is racism. These are all Russian structures. And in fact, the establishment of the PLO and of the Fatah in the Palestinian, what they call the Palestinian National Movement in the 1960s, was very much a Russian model, and helped by the Egyptians, which were Russian proxies. So yes, they were a Soviet invention.
And although this project might be a Soviet product or with a Soviet flavor, however, today the Palestinians need nobody's help. They've become masters. They rush immediately to their stage, to their platform, at which they always have access, Al Jazeera, to tell us the reality, to tell us the truth. So if a Gazan willfully pays to leave Gaza, Hamas will rush and tell you they were forced to leave. It's a population transfer, and the world believes them. So if now Al Jazeera wants us to believe, and they bring all those same agents and actors to tell you how President Maduro was kidnapped and how the imperialist West is after Venezuela's gold and oil, you have hysterical masses who will believe, unfortunately, because critical thinking is dismantled. Nevertheless, I do not think that those who are saying that President Maduro was kidnapped, and I'm talking about the professional activists, the professional anti-Semites, truly think that he's a sweet lamb. They know that he's a criminal, but they refuse to accept anything. Let me put it this way, if he's an ally of Iran, of Hamas, he's celebrated, and he's a champion of the Palestinian cause, he can do whatever he wants to his people. And this is the same we see, it applies to Khamenei. He can kill teenagers, young men and women, who want nothing but modernization. They want nothing but reforms. He can still kill them and get away with it because he's the champion, one of the champions of the Palestinian cause. People will see Hamas executing Gazans in broad daylight and be indifferent because they themselves are the champions of the Palestinian cause. So it has nothing to do with the people. or with the well-being of the Gazans.
It's become what a friend of mine has called a state of Palestine, meaning it's a state of mind. Palestinianism has become an instrumentalization of Islam. In other words, it's become like a meme, and it really means jihad. It means Islamic warfare. It means anything but the Palestinian people per se, because and I want to get back to Syria and Lebanon in this context, because what we've been witnessing, we've been trying to emphasize this point on Our Middle East, is that the entire Middle East is in the midst of this huge jihad, and jihad can be within the Arab Muslim world, and it can be against those that are not in the Arab Muslim world, and they use the Palestinian issue as the mask in order to distract from the real religious Islamist war by what we call the access of resistance in an Islamic context, because the West relates to Palestinianism, and the Islamists know that, and that's why they use, abuse, and exploit the Palestinian issue.
100%. It's become the vehicle carrying, advancing an Islamist agenda. In the West, everyone who wants to signal virtue, everyone who wants to obtain a certificate for being a good boy or a good girl, will identify with the Palestinian cause because they want to champion human rights. Now, what comes with that? That is too sophisticated for the average woke mind. They will not believe what we are telling them. We come from the Middle East. Those champions of the Palestinian cause are not invested in the liberation of a Palestinian people. If they cared for human rights, why then do they abuse their own people who are, for example, Khamenei, how does he treat the Iranian people? Assad, how did he treat the Syrian people? More than 500,000 were killed and the world did not blink. The Yemenites, take the Houthis, how do they treat the Yemenites? How does Hamas treat the Gazans? Did they consult with them before starting this war? How does Hezbollah treat the Lebanese people? Because of them, Lebanon was a failed state, a failed economy. And the list goes on and on and on. And as my friend, one of Israel's heroes, Hillel Neuer of UN Watch says, the world's biggest abusers of human rights are the biggest supporters of the Palestinian cause, or, to use his words, are the biggest critics of Israel. It is insane. They abuse their own people. At the same time, they're obsessed with Israel, and they are devoted for the well-being of the Palestinians.
I think we can call that jujitsu jihad, where everything is flipped around on its head. And in that context, Rowan, I want to go back to what you were talking about Lebanon and Syria and the great transformation of the Middle East. Do you think that the West fundamentally misunderstands the Middle East? And in this sense, President Trump bet the farm on President al-Shara or al-Jolani and invited him to the White House and met him in Saudi with MBS. He really put his credibility on the line.
Yeah.
And there are those that said, in Arabic, there's an expression, shwaya, shwaya. Go slowly. Verify, move forward, verify, move forward. But he didn't verify and move forward. He basically accepted him with both arms, and in fact ended up criticizing Israel for a counter-terror operation in Syria a couple of months ago, in which 13 people were killed in Beijan in Syria. And then, funny enough, the Islamists killed 3 Americans 2 weeks later. And it paints a picture, and I want to ask you, as really a profoundly native Middle Easterner, where does the West go wrong when it comes to the Middle East?
Oh, the West goes wrong in so many different ways because it is very difficult to understand such an evil ideology when you're constantly projecting the goodness in your heart. You don't want to believe that such evil exists. Hamas tells you, we will wipe out the Jews. And the West the average Westerner will tell you, but they don't mean it. Not only the average Westerner, serious politicians will still talk to those who tell you, we will wipe you out. They will think diplomacy works with the Islamic Republic in Iran. It does not. If there's a countdown, they are devout. They are obsessed with Israel and devoted to its destruction. The West fails to understand there are a few experts who are Arabists or Orientalists or experts on the Middle East, call it whatever you wish, who also get it wrong sometimes. They think that in our barbaric corner of this world, although the wheel was literally invented in this Middle East before Islam expanded, so we have ancient civilizations in plural. And what we're going through is a regression, unfortunately. The West would like to get rid of this problem. Don't forget that many immigrants and refugees keep like this wave after wave after wave after wave, and there is an impact on Western societies because they are exploiting the weaknesses in Western democracies. Not everyone, many like myself, run away from the Middle East, escape because they identify with Western values. But we are not the strongest. We are not the majority. The majority, the loudest, the active ones would like a caliphate everywhere they go. So what can we do to stop it? We speak to Westerners and we tell them, you don't get it. You don't get it. They think we're Islamophobic. What do you mean? Half of my family is Sunni, the other half is Shia. I love them very much. They're good people. But Islamists have an agenda and they are invested in this agenda and they could not care less about this material world. They're interested in the afterlife because this is what they are told. You just do your work here for Allah. You try to spread Islam and then after you die, then you will get your versions and your rivers of whatever wine in paradise. It's madness. In the case of America, I understand that they tried different strategies and it doesn't work. It backfired in Afghanistan, it backfired in Iraq, and they made a lot of mistakes because many so-called experts don't understand how the brain of Islamists tick. They don't really understand the ideology. They don't speak our language. So this time, I thought, they're trying something else, something different, and something that could be interesting. If indeed the West groomed al-Julani to turn him into Ahmad al-Shara to replace Assad, maybe this new persona could inspire thousands of desperate men in Syria, but not only Syrians, who thought they can achieve nothing in their life except through terrorism by becoming a militant, a jihadist, a fighter, because that was a job that provided food, that gave them income and the feeling of being in control, some power over others in this jungle that has become of Syria after 2011. So I thought that this new persona could inspire many to make a U-turn unless they have blood on their hands, and to integrate into society and try to develop different aspirations. At the same time, I was very worried, although Tom Barak, Trump's envoy to Syria, gave us the impression that everything is under control. When Israel destroyed the military infrastructure in Syria, I started understanding that maybe al-Julani was not fully trusted. Even if he as a person was trusted, even if he made a deal, at least we are aware that there are maybe tens of thousands who can pose a serious threat on Israel, but I was also concerned for the non-Muslims within Syria. So I was happy that Israel adopted this very swift and aggressive attitude there, and we've been watching for a year now. And unfortunately, things are not getting better. I speak to Sunni Syrians, they're happy. Of course, why would they be concerned? If you're Sunni, if your mother wears the veil, if your sisters wear the veil, you don't have beef with Al Julani and his government. You don't mind at all. If there is growing Islamization in the country, if they're inviting people, if there is active da'wah in the country, if the non-Muslims, be it Christians or Druze or Alawites or Ismailis or Kurds, if they are intimidated, that doesn't bother you because the Syrians are desperate, because they've been through hell. So they would like to give Ashara and his government a chance out of wishful thinking, out of desperation. However, can the region afford such a gamble? I do not know.
And in this particular gamble, there are two aspects. One, we see the region moving from Shia extremism as represented by the Islamic Republic of Iran to Sunni extremism represented by the Turkish regime, by Qatar, and other jihadi groups under their wings. And it's to go back to the Americans, you see an embrace of Erdogan, you see an embrace of Al-Thani in Qatar. And one wonders, are we basically making the same mistake in the West that we had made with Iran? I mean, Obama put $1 billion in cash, in euros, and sent them to the Ayatollahs and the Grand Ayatollah. And that was clearly a mistake. Now it looks like the Iranian people are having their say, and it may be that this regime is on its last legs. Perhaps we'll see. We don't know.
We hope. We're all praying.
But then we have a pivot to the legitimized Qatari regime and the Turkish regime. And how do we make sense of that?
I think it's concerning what's happening. If MBS brokered the meeting between Trump and Ashara, that's something good. It was concerning, it was worrying, it was very difficult for the Americans to see Al-Julani / Ashara received in New York 24 years after 9/11. He pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda. That was like, It's very confusing and very difficult to accept, to digest even. But I understand that we need a new strategy. So when that meeting was brokered in Riyadh, we were hopeful. Why? Because MBS introduced phenomenal changes. I'm going to say changes in Saudi. I lived in Saudi when we had the morality police. So what's happening now is phenomenal. So we are hopeful, and we were hoping, still are hoping, that Saudi will join this alternative vision for the Middle East, the Abraham Accords. So it's not so crazy or far-fetched to think that maybe Al-Julani Ashara was inspired by the new model presented by MBS. I'd like to see a new Muslim identity, the one we saw in the UAE, transforming. So there is potential. However, of course, if you are Qatar or Turkey or any other country, you will also try to pull the new Syrian government to your side, especially that the Syrians are desperate for investments to rebuild the country. They're desperate for anyone who's willing to inject cash, capital in their country. And who has more money than Qatar?
God.
Maybe.
But so here in the last part of our talk, you were born, grew up again with a Lebanese mom and a Syrian dad, and you're very much a daughter of Jerusalem today, a daughter of Israel. And it's inspiring because we've been arguing for a long time that Israel is the most indigenous country in what today is the Arab Muslim majority Middle East, and Israel is one of many, many minorities in the region. But you're in many ways, your heart is extending out to become a daughter of Israel. Help us understand, excuse me, Israel's indigeneity as you see it, in the Middle East and what Israel could become and how Israel should behave with a level of confidence of being an indigenous member of the Middle East?
So in May 2024, we had a conference at the Knesset, and I spoke there, and I told the Israelis back then, and I still believe this with all my heart. Israel is our hope in the Levant. A lot of people ask me, what does the Levant mean? Okay, the so-called Middle East, Israel is our hope, our inspiration. Why did I say this? For more than 1400 years, every minority in our region is bullied, was bullied, oppressed, humiliated, driven out, diluted, annihilated. And Israel reintroduced the dignity of the many indigenous people into our region when the early Zionists said, no, we are going back home. This is our land. Whether you accept it or not, we're not asking for permission. We can cooperate. We can be partners, but I'm no longer accepting to be your subject. You will not dictate how I live, what I do. And that should and can inspire the Maronites in Lebanon, the Copts in Egypt, and many, many, many other minorities in our region, but also the Kurds, who are not a minority, an ancient civilization that have every right to live in dignity and to practice freely without jihadists occasionally targeting them, calling them swines, destroying their shrines, destroying their churches. It's enough. And who dared pave the way for everybody else? The Jews. Maybe this is why the many in the Muslim and Arab worlds are adamant to make this project fail, because if Israel succeeds, many will follow in its footsteps. And this is our hope. And as someone who's seen both sides of the fence, I'd like other countries in the Middle East to become like Israel, where everybody can worship freely. You go to Haifa, you see the Ahmadiyya, the Baha'is can practice freely only in Israel. Nobody's forced to convert. I'd like women in the rest of the Middle East to be treated the way women are treated in Israel. When female pilots were dropping bombs on Iran, that was like, I have goosebumps again. Imagine that thought. This is what you get when you emancipate your women. They help you in every fight. While women, even underage women in Iran, are desperate to take the veil off, while Iraq, in this day and age, dropped the marriage age to 9. Not in the 7th century. So while many are trying to take us back to the 7th century, Israel is an inspiration on every level possible. That is not to say Israel is perfect. There is room for improvement. But this country has potential to grow, and it will. That is why I say it is our hope. And I wish more people, especially in the Arab world, will understand why they are forbidden from speaking to Israelis. Because if they know the truth, they will all demand that their countries become like this one here.
Well, I think you've said it all, Rowan. I think you've given us a reason for hope for a Middle East constantly in crisis, but on the edge also of potential opportunity and reform, and one in which the Lion of Judah, the Lion of Jerusalem stands strong, and to anchor a Middle East whose identity is still evolving. And someone like you who has seen it all and experienced it all, and all different cultures in the Middle East, you're uniquely able to teach us and help us understand the depths of this dramatic range of cultures across the region. So we thank you, Rowan Osman, for this wonderful conversation about the Middle East in crisis, but in the Middle East with potential and hope for security, stability, and prosperity for the region and the world.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Nan.
Thank you, Rowan.